Sarah Chen sat alone in her quarters, eating rice and vegetables from a plastic container. The room was small but clean, with white walls and a single window showing the giant orange planet they orbited. She could hear voices in the hallway outside, the high-pitched chattering of the Venlari crew members. They were laughing about something. The moment she opened her door, she knew the laughter would stop. It had been 3 months since she arrived at Research Station Kepler 9. 3 months of eating alone. 3 months of watching her co-workers freeze when she entered a room. 3 months of being the monster. She wasn't actually a monster, of course. She was a xenobiologist, a scientist who studied alien life. She had 2 degrees and a specialty in extremophile organisms, the tiny creatures that lived in impossible places. She was good at her job, but none of that mattered to the Venlari. The Venlari looked like rabbits that walked on 2 legs. They had soft gray or brown fur, long ears that moved to catch every sound, and huge dark eyes on the sides of their heads. They were small, barely reaching Sarah's shoulder, and they were prey animals. Every single thing about their evolution screamed at them to run from predators. Sarah had forward-facing eyes. She ate meat. She moved quietly without meaning to. Her footsteps didn't echo like theirs did. When she smiled, they could see her teeth. Everything about her triggered ancient instincts buried deep in their genes. She finished her meal and pulled up the security monitors on her tablet. It was a guilty habit, but she couldn't help it. She watched the cafeteria where a dozen Venlari sat together, eating and talking. Their ears perked up and swiveled as they shared stories. They touched each other's shoulders in friendship. It looked warm. It looked nice. Sarah remembered the last time she'd tried to eat in the cafeteria. She'd walked in with her tray, moving slowly and carefully like she always did. The room had gone silent. Every Venlari had turned to look at her, and she'd seen their ears flatten against their heads. One of them, a young engineer, had actually fainted, just collapsed right there. She'd left her tray and gone back to her quarters. She hadn't tried again. The station commander, a older Venlari named Trill, had been apologetic but firm. "We know you're not dangerous, Dr. Chen. We know it intellectually. But our bodies don't listen to our minds. It's not personal." But it felt personal. It felt very personal to eat every meal alone, to see people physically shake when they had to speak to her, to watch them huddle together for safety when she walked down a hallway. Sarah sighed and closed the tablet. She changed into her sleep clothes and climbed into bed. Tomorrow she had work to do in the biology lab. Real work. Studying the bacteria samples they'd collected from the station's water recycling system. The bacteria didn't care that she was a predator. They just grew and divided and lived their simple lives. She was almost asleep when her door chimed. The sound made her sit up fast. No one visited her. Ever. "Yes," she called out. "Dr. Chen." The voice was shaking. "This is Engineer Kessel. We have an emergency. Reactor coolant leak in Section B. I need help." Sarah was on her feet immediately, pulling on her uniform. She opened the door. Kessel stood there, a small brown-furred Venlari with tools hanging from his belt. He was trembling, his ears flat, his eyes wide. But he was here. "Show me," Sarah said quietly. They ran through the corridors together. Kessel stayed 3 steps ahead of her, his body language screaming that he wanted to run faster, to get away. But he didn't. He led her to the reactor access panel where red lights were flashing. "The coolant line is cracked," Kessel said, his voice high and tight. "If it ruptures completely, this whole section will flood with radiation. I can't reach it. I'm too big. But you're thin enough to fit through the maintenance shaft." Sarah looked at the narrow opening. "What do I need to do?" Kessel explained quickly, his words tumbling over each other. Sarah listened, memorizing each step. Then she grabbed the emergency patch kit and squeezed into the shaft. It was hot inside. The coolant pipes radiated heat that made sweat pour down her face. She crawled forward on her elbows, dragging the kit behind her. The shaft was so narrow her shoulders scraped the sides. "Left at the junction," Kessel's voice called through her radio. "Then straight for 3 meters." Sarah found the crack. Green coolant was leaking out, hissing as it hit the hot metal. She worked fast, cleaning the surface, applying the patch, sealing it according to Kessel's instructions. Her hands shook a little. If she messed this up, a lot of people could die. "Patch applied," she said into the radio. "Testing the seal now." The leak stopped. The hissing ended. Sarah let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "It's holding," Kessel said. His voice sounded strange. "Dr. Chen, it's holding. The pressure is stable. You did it." Sarah crawled backward through the shaft, inch by inch. When she finally emerged, covered in sweat and grime, Kessel was standing there. He was still trembling, but he looked at her differently now. His ears weren't completely flat anymore. "Thank you," he whispered. You saved a lot of lives tonight." "You're welcome," Sarah said. She wanted to say more, wanted to tell him that she was grateful he'd asked for her help despite his fear, but she stayed quiet. She didn't want to push. Kessel started to leave, then paused. He didn't turn around, but he spoke again. "My daughter, Pip, she's 7 years old. If the reactor had failed..." He trailed off. "I understand," Sarah said softly. Kessel nodded once and walked away quickly, his ears swiveling nervously. But before he turned the corner, he looked back at her, just for a second, just long enough for Sarah to see something other than fear in his eyes. Sarah walked back to her quarters slowly. She was exhausted and dirty, and her shoulders hurt from crawling through the tight shaft. But something felt different. Something small had changed. She showered and fell into bed. For the first time in 3 months, she didn't feel quite so alone. It was a tiny feeling, barely there. But it was something. Outside her window, the orange planet continued its slow rotation. The station hummed with life and activity. And somewhere in the corridors, a Venlari engineer named Kessel was going home to his daughter, thinking about the predator who had saved them all. 3 weeks had passed since the reactor incident. Sarah noticed small changes, very small, but they were there. Kessel now nodded to her in the hallways instead of just fleeing. A few other Venlari could manage brief conversations with her about work without shaking too badly. It wasn't friendship, but it wasn't total fear either. Sarah woke up one morning and found something strange outside her door. A rock. It was smooth and round, about the size of her thumb, with bands of purple and blue running through it. She picked it up and turned it over in her hand. It was beautiful. She looked up and down the corridor. Empty. Who would leave a rock outside her door? Sarah took the rock inside and scanned it with her geology analyzer. The results made her eyebrows rise. It was a rare crystalline formation from the asteroid belt the station mined. Someone had gone to some effort to get this. She placed it on her desk next to a photo of her family back on Earth. The rock caught the light from her window and sparkled. 2 days later, she found another rock. This one was smaller and shaped like a tiny spiral. It had the same purple-blue colors. Sarah smiled despite her confusion. She put it next to the first rock. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the rocks. Finally, she got up and checked the station's security footage. It took her an hour of searching, but she found it. 3 small figures appeared on the camera, moving nervously down the corridor toward her door. They were young Venlari, children. Cubs, as the Venlari called them. The tallest one was carrying something. They approached Sarah's door like they were approaching a dragon's cave, ears swiveling in all directions, ready to run. The tall one placed something on the ground. All 3 of them stared at the door for a long moment. Then they ran, their small feet pattering away down the hall. Sarah watched the footage 3 more times. The cubs couldn't have been older than 10 in human years, and they were bringing her gifts. Her. The predator that made grown adults faint. She felt something warm and tight in her chest, something that made her eyes sting a little. The next morning, Sarah cleaned both rocks until they shined. She placed them in the center of her desk where anyone could see them. She positioned her desk lamp so it lit them up. Then she went to work. At lunch, she checked her security camera. The 3 cubs were back. They were peeking through the crack of her door, which she'd left slightly open. She watched them see the rocks on her desk, see them displayed like treasures. The smallest cub jumped up and down. The tallest one put her paws over her mouth. The middle one pointed and chattered excitedly. Sarah found herself smiling at her computer screen. Over the next week, more gifts appeared. A piece of colorful wire twisted into a loop. A broken circuit board with interesting patterns. A dried flower from the station's hydroponics bay. Each morning, Sarah found something new. She created a shelf on her wall just for the gifts. She took a photo of it and printed it out, then taped it to the outside of her door with a note written in careful Venlari script. "Thank you for the beautiful things. My desk was too empty before. Dr. Chen." The next gift came with a drawing. It was done in crayon on recycled paper. It showed 3 small Venlari and 1 tall figure that was probably supposed to be Sarah. They were all smiling. Well, the Venlari were smiling. Sarah's face was just a circle, but there were stars drawn around it. Sarah put the drawing up on her wall. Then she sat on her bed and cried a little. Good tears, though, the kind that meant something was healing. She started researching Venlari culture more deeply. She found information about cub behavior, about how young Venlari bonded with adults. They brought gifts to adults they admired or wanted to impress. It was instinctive, something their species had done for thousands of years. These cubs were trying to bond with her, with the predator. Sarah decided she needed to do something in return. She spent an evening in her quarters with the rocks the cubs had given her. She arranged them in a pattern, smallest to largest. Then she took out her tablet and started writing names on small pieces of paper. Rocky, Spiral, Star. Each rock got a name. She photographed the arrangement and printed it. The next morning, she posted the photo outside her door with a new note. I named them. They are my family now. That afternoon, she was working in her lab when she heard something outside. Voices. Young voices. She looked up at her door and saw 3 small faces peering through the window. They saw her looking and immediately ducked down. Sarah stood up slowly and walked to the door. She opened it carefully. The 3 cubs were huddled together in the hallway, looking up at her with huge, dark eyes. 2 of them had their ears completely flat. But the tallest one, the brave one, had her ears only halfway down. Hello, Sarah said very quietly. She knew that loud noises scared them. The cubs didn't run. That was something. I like your gifts very much, Sarah continued. She slowly sat down on the floor, making herself smaller and less scary. The rocks are beautiful. Would you like to see them? The tallest cub took 1 tiny step forward. Her ears came up a little more. I'm Pip, she squeaked. This is Mira and Toll. She pointed to the other 2 cubs. We found the rocks in the mining bay. The workers said we could have them. They're perfect, Sarah said. I've never gotten such nice gifts before. Really? The middle cub, Mira, asked. Her voice was full of wonder. Really? Sarah confirmed. The smallest one, Toll, whispered something to Pip. Pip nodded and looked at Sarah. Toll wants to know if you really named them. I did. Would you like to know what I named them? All 3 cubs nodded eagerly. Sarah told them about Rocky and Spiral and Star. She told them how she'd arranged them on her desk so the light hit them just right. She told them that every morning when she woke up, looking at the rocks made her happy. The cubs moved a little closer. Not much, but enough. They sat down in the hallway, still ready to run but listening to every word. "I study very tiny living things," Sarah explained. "Bacteria and microbes. They're so small you can't see them without a microscope. Would you like to hear about them?" Mira's ears perked all the way up. "Yes." So Sarah told them about extremophiles, about bacteria that lived in boiling water and freezing ice, about microbes that ate metal and tiny creatures that could survive in space. The cubs listened with complete attention. When Sarah finally stopped talking, she realized an hour had passed. The cubs were still there, sitting in the hallway, their fear almost forgotten. "We should go," Pip said reluctantly. "Our parents will worry." "Of course," Sarah said. "Thank you for visiting me." The cubs stood up and started to leave, but Tall turned back and said in a voice so quiet Sarah almost missed it, "We'll bring you more shiny things." "I would like that very much," Sarah said. She watched them run down the corridor, their small forms disappearing around the corner. Then she went back into her lab and sat at her desk. She looked at the rocks, at the drawings, at all the little gifts. For the first time since arriving at the station, Sarah didn't feel like a monster. She felt like someone who had been given something precious: trust, from the smallest and bravest members of a species that had every reason to fear her. Outside her window, the stars shone cold and distant, but inside her lab, the rocks caught the light and sparkled with warmth. The gifts didn't stop. Every few days, Sarah would find something new outside her door. A smooth pebble, a piece of reflective metal bent into a curve, a small bolt that had been polished until it shined. Once, she found a tiny potted plant that Mira had grown herself in hydroponics class. Sarah's shelf was getting crowded. She added a second shelf, then a third. She took pictures of each new gift and posted them outside her door. The cubs started leaving drawings too, showing their day at school or their favorite foods, or sometimes just patterns of colors they thought were pretty. Sarah started to learn their personalities. Pip was the brave one, the leader who always went first. Mira loved science and asked a million questions about everything. Toll was quiet and thoughtful, but he had an eye for beautiful things. His gifts were always the shiniest or the most interesting shapes. One day, Sarah was walking to her lab when she saw all three cubs in the corridor ahead. Usually they ran when they saw her coming. This time, Pip stood still. Her ears were flat and her whole body was tense, but she didn't run. Mira and Toll hid behind her, peeking out. Sarah stopped walking. She didn't want to scare them, but Pip took a breath and stayed where she was. "Good morning, Pip," Sarah said gently. "Good morning, Mira and Toll." "Good morning, Dr. Chen," Pip squeaked. Her voice shook, but she said it. Sarah smiled and walked past them slowly, giving them plenty of space. When she looked back, all three cubs were watching her. Toll waved one small paw. Sarah waved back. That afternoon, she found the cubs sitting outside her lab. They weren't peeking through the window anymore. They were just sitting there, backs against the wall, talking quietly to each other. Sarah opened the door. "Would you like to come in?" she asked. Three pairs of huge eyes stared at her. They wanted to. She could see it. But their instincts held them back. "What if I talk to you through the door?" Sarah suggested. "I'm working on something interesting today." So she left the door open and went back to her microscope. She started describing what she was seeing to them. The bacteria moving around, feeding, dividing into two cells. She made it like a story, giving the bacteria names and personalities. The cubs crept closer to the doorway. They didn't come in, but they sat right at the threshold, listening. This became their routine. Every day after school, the cubs would come and sit outside Sarah's lab. She would work and talk, explaining her research in simple words. They asked questions. So many questions. Mira wanted to know how bacteria ate, Pip wanted to know if bacteria could think. Toll wanted to know what colors they were. Other Venlari started noticing. Parents would walk by and see their children sitting calmly near the predator human, and their ears would flatten in distress. But the cubs were clearly happy. They were learning. They weren't hurt. Sarah heard the whispers, though. It's not natural. What if something happens? She's still a predator. The words hurt, but she understood. Change was scary, especially when instinct was involved. Station Commander Trill called Sarah to her office one day. Sarah went, nervous about what this might mean. Trill sat behind her desk, ears twitching uncomfortably. Dr. Chen, I've received complaints. Some of the crew are concerned about your interactions with the cubs. Sarah's heart sank. I would never hurt them. I know, Trill said quickly. Intellectually, we all know. But Security Officer Dren has formally requested your transfer. He says it's inappropriate for someone of your species to be bonding with Venlari children. What do you think? Sarah asked quietly. Trill was silent for a long moment. I think, she said slowly, that I have never seen cubs so excited about science. I think Mira's teacher says she won't stop talking about extremophiles. I think Pip told her father she wants to be a xenobiologist when she grows up. Trill's ears swiveled. I think fear is a powerful thing, Dr. Chen, but so is curiosity. What happens now? I want to try something, Trill said. You've requested to create a safe interaction zone in your lab, a place where the cubs can visit officially, where their parents can observe through one-way glass without triggering their own fear responses. I'm approving a trial period. Sarah felt relief flood through her. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Trill said. If anything goes wrong, even a little wrong, the trial ends immediately. The safe zone took a week to set up. One wall of Sarah's lab was replaced with special glass. From the lab side, it looked like a normal window. From the other side, it was a one-way mirror. Parents could watch their cubs interact with Sarah without Sarah seeing them, which meant their prey instincts wouldn't activate as strongly. The first official visit was scheduled. Pip, Mira, and Toll arrived with their parents. Kessel was there, Pip's father. He still trembled slightly around Sarah, but he managed to nod to her. The cubs entered the lab. Their parents went to the observation room on the other side of the glass. For the first few minutes, the cubs just stood there, suddenly shy now that this was official. Sarah sat at her desk and waited. She'd learned that patience was important. Finally, Mira spoke up. Can we see the bacteria now? Sarah smiled. Of course. She showed them her microscope, teaching them how to adjust the focus. She let each of them look, gasping with delight as they saw the tiny living things swimming around. She showed them how to prepare slides and how to use the staining chemicals to make different parts of the cells visible. They were so focused on the science that they forgot to be afraid. Toll stood right next to Sarah's elbow, watching her prepare a slide. Mira asked if she could try, and Sarah guided her small paws through the process. Pip wanted to know everything about every piece of equipment in the lab. An hour passed, then 2. The cubs were completely comfortable now, moving around the lab freely, asking questions, touching equipment with careful paws. Then Mira asked the question that changed everything. Dr. Chen, she said, looking up with those huge dark eyes, why do predators protect cubs that aren't theirs? Sarah blinked. What do you mean? In nature, predators eat prey. They don't help prey cubs. They especially don't spend time teaching them things. But you do. Why? Sarah thought about this carefully. Behind the glass, she knew the parents were listening too. Because, Sarah said slowly, humans are predators, yes. But we're also social. We live in groups. We raise children together, not just our own children, but the whole community's children. A long time ago on Earth, if a child was alone and crying, any adult would help them. It didn't matter if the child was theirs or not. That's how humans survived. So you protect cubs because you're human? Pip asked. I protect cubs because they need protecting, Sarah said. And because teaching is important to humans. Sharing knowledge, helping the next generation learn. That's as much a part of being human as hunting ever was. Tall, who rarely spoke, said quietly, We're not your cubs, though. Sarah looked at all three of them, at their serious little faces, their swiveling ears, their small paws. No, she agreed. You're not. But maybe that doesn't matter as much as we all thought it did. In the observation room, Kessel watched his daughter lean against the human's arm to get a better look at the microscope. He watched Sarah automatically adjust her position so Pip could see better, her movements gentle and careful. His instincts still screamed at him, his heart still raced, but his daughter was smiling, learning, growing braver every day. Maybe, he thought. Fear wasn't the only thing worth listening to. When the session ended and the cubs left, Kessel waited outside the lab. When Sarah emerged, he did something that surprised both of them. He didn't run. He stood there and spoke. Thank you, he said, for teaching her that the universe is bigger than fear. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. The next day, she found a new gift outside her door. A polished stone, but not from the cubs this time. It was from Security Officer Dren. There was no note, but Sarah understood. It was an apology, or maybe just the beginning of one. She placed it on her shelf with all the others, each one a small victory over instinct, each one a shiny reminder that trust could grow in the most unlikely places. The alarm started screaming at 14:47 station time. Sarah was in her lab labeling samples when the red lights began flashing. The computer voice was calm but urgent. Chemical leak in Section C. Toxic gas detected. Automated bulkheads will seal in 90 seconds. All personnel evacuate immediately. Sarah ran for the door. Section C was the old storage area, mostly unused now. No one should be there. The bulkheads would seal it off to protect the rest of the station, but anyone inside would be trapped with the toxic gas. She made it to the corridor when she heard the scream over the station intercom. It was Kessel's voice, raw with panic. My daughter! Pip is in Section C. The cubs were exploring. They're all in there. Sarah's blood went cold. Pip, Mira, and Tall in Section C, with toxic gas filling the air. She changed direction and sprinted toward Section C. Her longer legs carried her fast. Faster than any Venlari could run. She could hear footsteps behind her, other crew members responding to the emergency, but she was ahead of them all. 60 seconds until bulkhead seal, the computer announced. Sarah hit the entrance to Section C and saw the cubs. They were 30 meters down the corridor, frozen in place. The toxic gas was a yellow-green fog rolling toward them from a ruptured chemical storage tank. The cubs stood completely still, their ears flat, their eyes wide. They weren't running. They weren't moving at all. Prey freeze. Sarah had read about it. When Venlari got too scared, their bodies just stopped. It was a defense mechanism from their evolutionary past. If you couldn't outrun the predator, you froze and hoped it didn't see you. But gas didn't care if you moved or not. 45 seconds until bulkhead seal. Sarah ran into Section C. Behind her, she heard voices shouting. More Venlari were arriving at the entrance. They saw their children frozen in the toxic fog. They tried to run in. Their bodies wouldn't let them. The gas, the danger, the threat triggered every prey instinct they had. Their legs locked. They couldn't move forward. They could only stand at the entrance and scream. Kessel was there. He was crying, his whole body shaking, trying to force his legs to move. I can't, he sobbed. I can't move. Pip, Pip. Sarah didn't slow down. She held her breath as she hit the edge of the gas cloud. Her eyes started burning immediately. The cubs were still frozen, locked in their instinctive response. She could see their sides heaving, breathing in the toxic air. 30 seconds until bulkhead seal. She reached Toll first, the smallest one. She scooped him up with one arm. He was light, barely 20 pounds. She grabbed Mira with her other arm. Both cubs stayed frozen, their bodies rigid. Pip was 3 steps further away. Sarah tucked Mira and Toll against her chest and lunged for Pip. She had no free hands. She bent down and grabbed Pip's jacket collar with her teeth, pulling the cub toward her. 15 seconds until bulkhead seal. Sarah ran. The cubs were awkward in her arms, their frozen bodies making them hard to carry, but she ran anyway. Her lungs screamed for air. Her eyes streamed with tears from the gas. The yellow-green fog was thick around her now, filling her vision. She could see the bulkhead ahead, starting to descend from the ceiling. A massive metal door that would seal Section C completely. The gap was shrinking. The Venlari at the entrance were screaming. Some of them had collapsed, their bodies giving out from the stress of trying to override their instincts. Kessel was on his knees, reaching out helplessly. 5 seconds until bulkhead seal. Sarah threw herself forward. She twisted her body, protecting the cubs with her torso, and slid under the descending bulkhead. Metal scraped against her back. She felt her uniform tear. Then she was through, rolling into the safe corridor beyond. The bulkhead slammed shut behind her with a final boom. Sarah gasped for air, her lungs burning. The cubs were still clutched to her chest. She coughed violently, her whole body shaking, but she didn't let go. Hands reached for her. "Medical personnel," someone said. "Get them to medical." Sarah tried to release the cubs, but they wouldn't let go. Their frozen state had broken the moment she'd gotten them to safety, and now all 3 were clinging to her with desperate strength. Their small paws gripped her uniform. Their faces were buried against her. "It's okay," Sarah wheezed. "You're safe. You're safe now." Kessel crawled toward them. He reached out and touched his daughter's head with a shaking paw. Pip turned and saw her father, but she didn't let go of Sarah. She just reached out one paw to him while keeping the other locked around Sarah's neck. "You ran toward them," Kessel whispered. He was staring at Sarah with an expression she'd never seen on a Venlari face before. "We couldn't. We're their parents and we couldn't move. But you ran toward them." Sarah didn't know what to say. She'd just reacted. She hadn't thought about it. Medical arrived with stretchers. They checked the cubs first. Mild gas exposure, they said. They'd be okay. Some coughing for a few days, but no permanent damage. They checked Sarah next. More severe exposure because she'd been in the gas cloud longer. They gave her oxygen and something for her burning eyes and throat. The cubs still wouldn't let go of her. They sat in the medical bay, all 3 of them pressed against Sarah's sides while the doctors worked. When someone tried to separate them, Toll started crying. So the doctors worked around them. News of what happened spread through the station fast. By the time Sarah was released from medical, there was a crowd in the corridor. Venlari crew members, dozens of them, just standing there, watching. Sarah walked out with the 3 cubs still clinging to her. She didn't know what to expect. Anger, maybe, that she'd been in a position to save their children when their own parents couldn't. But Kessel stepped forward. He placed his paw over his heart, the Venlari gesture for deep gratitude and respect. One by one, every Venlari in the corridor did the same. No one said anything. They didn't need to. Station Commander Trill called an emergency meeting that evening. Every crew member attended. The cubs were with their families now, resting but okay. Sarah sat alone in the back, still smelling faintly of toxic chemicals despite 2 showers. Trill stood at the front of the room. Her ears were straight up, her posture formal. "Today," she said, "we learned something important. Our instincts keep us safe. They have for millions of years, but they have limits." She paused. "When our children were in danger, our bodies would not let us save them. We tried, we wanted to, but we could not move." The room was completely silent. "Dr. Chen did not hesitate," Trill continued. She ran into danger while we stood frozen. She saved 3 cubs that are not her species, not her responsibility, not her biological imperative to protect. She did it because she is capable of choosing action over instinct. Trill looked directly at Sarah. We have been afraid of you because you are a predator. But today we learned that predator instincts are not the same as predator intentions. You hunt knowledge, Dr. Chen. You protect the vulnerable. You teach the young. These are not the actions of a monster. Security Officer Dren stood up. He was the one who had wanted Sarah transferred. I was wrong, he said simply. I let fear guide me. I apologize, Dr. Chen. Sarah nodded, her throat tight. One by one, other Venlari stood and spoke. They shared their thoughts, their realizations, their gratitude. They talked about how their cubs had been learning from Sarah, growing braver, asking questions about science. They talked about how maybe different species had different strengths. And that was okay. When the meeting ended, Sarah walked back to her quarters. She was exhausted, her body aching, her throat still raw. But something fundamental had changed. The Venlari in the corridors didn't freeze when she passed. They nodded, some even smiled. When she reached her door, she found something waiting, a rock, polished and smooth and carefully placed. But this one wasn't from the cubs. It was from Dren. And next to it was another from Trill, and another from Kessel, and more, a whole pile of stones and small shiny objects, gifts from the adult Venlari, each one an acknowledgement, an apology, an offering of trust. Sarah gathered them carefully and brought them inside. She looked at her shelves, already full of gifts from the cubs. She was going to need more shelves. Outside her window, the orange planet turned slowly. And inside her quarters, surrounded by rocks and memories and trust given freely, Sarah Chen finally felt like she had found her home. 6 months had passed since the incident in Section C. Sarah sat at her desk, writing a report about her latest research findings. Around her, the walls of her quarters were covered with shelves. Every shelf was full of gifts. Rocks in every color, polished metal pieces, drawings and paintings, small sculptures made from recycled materials, dried flowers and interesting seeds, circuit boards arranged in patterns, shiny bolts and nuts, pieces of wire bent into shapes, even a few crystals that caught the light and threw rainbows across the room. Each gift had a small label beneath it, with a name and a date. Some were from Pip, Mira, and Toll, but many were from other Venlari now, from adults who had overcome their fear, from other cubs who had heard about the human who collected shiny things, from crew members who wanted to say thank you or I trust you or simply I see you now. Sarah's quarters looked like a museum of small treasures. Visitors often didn't understand at first. They'd see the shelves and ask if she collected rocks as a hobby. She'd smile and explain that each one was a gift, a memory, a bridge built between species. The cubs still visited her every day after school, but they weren't scared anymore. They ran into her lab like it was a second home. They called her Sarah now instead of Dr. Chen, though they still used her title in formal settings. Pip was 12 now and absolutely certain she wanted to be a xenobiologist. She helped Sarah with basic lab work and took detailed notes in a journal she carried everywhere. She'd started studying human culture and language, fascinated by the differences between predator and prey species. Mira was 10 and had discovered a love for chemistry. She was always asking if she could mix different substances together to see what happened. Sarah had to carefully supervise these experiments. But Mira's curiosity was boundless and brilliant. Toll was 9 and still the quietest of the 3, but he'd found his calling in art. He drew everything, especially the bacteria and microbes he saw through Sarah's microscope. His drawings were beautiful and scientifically accurate. Sarah had several framed on her walls. The station had changed too. More humans had been assigned to Kepler 9, and the Venlari crew no longer panicked at their arrival. The new humans were always surprised by how comfortable everything was, how the Venlari would chat with them casually in the cafeteria or ask them for help with heavy lifting. Station Commander Trill had written a document called the Kepler-9 Protocols about integrating predator and prey species in space stations. Other stations were using it now. There were even discussions about creating mixed species crews on purpose, using the different strengths of different evolutionary backgrounds. Sarah had become something of a celebrity in xenobiological circles. She gave presentations about cross-species trust building and wrote papers about overcoming evolutionary instinct. But her favorite part was still the quiet moments in her lab with the cubs, teaching them about the universe. Today was special, though. A new human was arriving at the station. His name was Marcus Webb, and he was a security officer. Sarah had seen his file. He was a big man, over 6 feet tall, with a deep voice, and what the file politely called an intimidating presence. She was curious to see how the Venlari would react. Would they regress to their old fears? Or would the trust they'd built with her extend to other humans? She went to the docking bay when Marcus's shuttle arrived. Half the station seemed to be there too, watching nervously. Marcus stepped out, and Sarah had to hide a smile. He did look intimidating, with broad shoulders and a scarred face, and the kind of stillness that suggested he could move very fast if needed. The Venlari crew tensed, ears flattened. Some of them took steps backward, old instincts rising up. Then Pip stepped forward. She was 12 years old and barely reached Marcus's waist. She walked right up to him, ears at half-mast showing she was nervous but not frozen, and held out her paw. In it was a smooth, shiny rock. "Welcome to Kepler-9, Pip said clearly. "I'm Pip. This is for you." Marcus looked down at the tiny Venlari, offering him a rock. He looked at Sarah, confused. Sarah nodded encouragingly. Marcus knelt down slowly, making himself smaller. He took the rock with careful fingers. "Thank you," he said, his deep voice gentle. "It's beautiful." Mira and Tall came forward then, along with a few other Venlari cubs. They clustered around Marcus, chattering and asking questions and showing absolutely no fear. Where was he from? What was Earth like? Did he like science? Did he want to see the station? The adult Venlari watched this and slowly relaxed. If the cubs weren't afraid, maybe they didn't need to be either. One by one, they came forward to welcome Marcus properly. Sarah caught Kessel's eye across the docking bay. He smiled at her, a real smile with no fear in it. His daughter was brave enough to welcome a predator with a gift. His daughter had learned that the universe was bigger than instinct. That evening, Sarah sat in her quarters and recorded a video message to her family on Earth. She did this every month, keeping them updated on her life among the stars. "Mom, Dad, Jamie," she said to the camera, "I know when I first came here, I told you it was hard, that I felt alone, that I wasn't sure I could handle being the only human." She paused and smiled. "Things are different now." She turned the camera to show her walls of treasures. "See all of these? Every single one is a gift from someone who decided trust was more important than fear. The Venlari have a saying now. When they give someone a gift, especially a shiny rock, they call it trophy giving, but not a trophy like you win in a competition." Sarah picked up the first rock, the one Pip had given her a year ago. "They call it a trophy because it represents a victory, not over another person, but over yourself, over your own fear, your own programming, your own instincts. Every rock says, 'I chose courage over comfort.'" She placed the rock back on its shelf with care. "They think they're giving me trophies, but really, each one is a trophy for them, evidence that they grew beyond what their genes told them they had to be." Sarah turned the camera back to herself. "I keep them because they remind me that friendship can exist between predator and prey. That instinct isn't destiny. That maybe the future of the galaxy isn't about who's stronger or faster or has sharper teeth. Maybe it's about who's willing to share their rocks. She thought about Marcus, probably in his quarters now, confused about why he'd been given a rock by a tiny alien child. She'd have to explain it to him. She'd have to help him understand the weight and meaning of that simple gift. The Cubs are calling themselves hunters of two worlds now, Sarah continued. They say they hunt for knowledge like humans do, but they also honor their Venlari heritage. Pip wants to go to university on Earth. Mira wants to study at the Venlari Science Academy and then do her doctorate with human professors. Toll wants to be an artist who shows both species' perspectives. Sarah felt her eyes getting wet. I came here thinking I was alone, but I'm not. I have a family here. It's not the family I was born into, but it's the family I chose, and that makes it just as real. She ended the recording and sat back in her chair. Through her window, she could see the stars, countless and bright. Each one might have planets. Each planet might have life. Some of that life might be predators. Some might be prey. And somewhere out there, maybe they were learning to trust each other too. There was a knock at her door. Sarah opened it to find all three Cubs standing there with their parents. Kessel, Mira's mother Sala, and Toll's father Ven. The adults looked nervous but determined. We wanted to ask you something, Kessel said. Officially. Of course, Sarah said. Pip stepped forward. We want you to be our mentor, officially. In Venlari culture, a mentor is like a second parent. They guide you and teach you and help you become who you're meant to be. You already do that, Mira added. We just want to make it formal. Will you? Toll asked quietly. Sarah looked at the three Cubs, these brave, small beings who had changed her life and their entire station. She looked at their parents, who were offering her a place in their families despite every instinct that told them not to. Yes, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. I would be honored. The Cubs cheered and rushed forward to hug her. The adults stepped forward too, placing their paws over their hearts in the gesture of deep respect. But then Kessel did something unprecedented. He reached out and gently touched Sarah's shoulder, a gesture of affection, of trust, of family. That night, after everyone had left, Sarah added 3 new items to her shelves. Not rocks this time, but formal documents written in careful Venlari script. Mentorship agreements for Pip, Mira, and Toll. They would be signed tomorrow in a small ceremony. She placed them in the center of the main shelf, right next to the very first rock Pip had left outside her door. The rock that had started everything. Outside, the station hummed with life. Venlari and humans working together, learning from each other, building something new. And in her quarters, surrounded by her collection of small treasures, Sarah Chen smiled. Each rock, each gift, each trophy was a reminder that the scariest monsters could become the fiercest protectors. All it took was someone brave enough to offer a shiny rock, and someone kind enough to put it on their desk like it mattered. Because it did matter. Every single one mattered more than words could say.